As the U.S. and its allies involve themselves more deeply in Israel's war on Gaza, they're finding it more and more difficult to provide the promised military assistance to Ukraine. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius admitted that the European Union cannot keep its promise to supply Ukraine with 1 million artillery rounds. He told the media before a summit of the EU defense ministers in Brussels recently that the pledge to deliver the shells by the end of March 2024 had always been unrealistic, and that while Brussels had the money to pay for shells, European arms firms did not have the extra capacity to increase production. France has also announced that it will stop providing Ukraine with arms from its arsenals. That will force Kiev to start buying its own weapons from French companies, which are already stressed. French Minister of the Armed Forces Sébastien Lecornu, in an interview with France Info on September 29th, explained that Paris has managed to get rid of plenty of old weapons by transferring them to Ukraine, but now Kiev would have to maintain direct business ties with French arms makers. Meanwhile, the U.S. has allocated more than $14 billion in additional funds to buy more weapons for Israel, which will come at the expense of not just funding, but production capacity previously allocated to Ukraine. And then there is the real possibility of a war shaping up with China over Taiwan. What does it mean? For a look at the big picture of the U.S.-NATO geostrategic situation, we go to Moscow to speak with analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, let's jump into this sort of a description of the large picture that people are not really discussing.
Don, I think this is a good moment to kind of reflect and step back and take a look at the big picture geopolitically. With the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, with NATO on one side and Russia on the other, and now the blow up of the Israeli-Palestinian situation that has the potential, the U.S. is already involved for all intents and purposes, and the greater West, at least in providing material and political support for Israel.
The U.S. has troops on the ground in there, too.
Yeah. I mean, supposedly there for hostage rescue. But, the U.S. has aircraft carriers parked in the Eastern Med, off the coast of Israel, now in the Persian Gulf as well. And a host of other amphibious landing ships, extra squadrons of F-16s. They're emergency rushing extra air defense all over the region, straining U.S. capability. There's warnings now that, and this is all very interesting because now the conflicts in Ukraine and Israel are directly competing for some of the same resources. Artillery shells and air defense.
You've been talking about that for a long time.
Yeah. Last year, the U.S. raided a secret war cache of 300,000 artillery shells that it had stored in Israel, and another one in South Korea, by the way, the same size, in the case of emergencies in the region that could have been drawn on by either the U.S. or the Israel if it was needed. Well, the U.S. raided it last year and sent it all to Ukraine. Boom, it's all gone, right? And they still can't anywhere near meet the Kiev regime's demand for artillery shells. And now suddenly this conflict shows up out of nowhere. And it really showed up out of nowhere. Literally just a few weeks before it broke out, Jake Sullivan was making smug comments about how stable the Middle East is under the Biden administration.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, the Palestinians have been simmering in resentment for so long. A lot of people, I think myself included, thought there wasn't the capacity for fight back anymore. So that has changed dynamics. Air defense is another big one. The Kiev regime is in urgent need of air defense, and that's now going, both the missiles and launchers are going to Israel and to U.S. military bases throughout the region that are suddenly under threat from Iranian-backed resistance axis groups in Iraq and Syria that are shelling the U.S. military occupation bases there, but also the Houthis have been throwing cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and drones at Israel. All of them that I've heard have been batted down by U.S. naval forces. But they've also successfully shot down one, maybe two U.S. Reaper drones,
That's right.
which is really interesting.
There's a question about that helicopter, too, that went down.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So, I mean, the costs are already rising, and there's reports of casualties at U.S. military casualties at U.S. occupation bases in East Syria as well, but I haven't heard that those have been confirmed yet.
Yeah.
And on top of this all, you still have the Taiwan China issue up, and BBC just ran a story this week about how the U.S. is just shoveling arms into Taiwan, and now the three conflicts are all competing for some of the same military resources, and each have their own contingent in the blob and the lobbyists in D.C. that are now all fighting for a piece of the pie.
Right.
And so in some ways, the U.S. is really facing both attention and military overstretch. And when I say that, it's particularly because in none of these three conflicts at the moment is the U.S. military really allowed to exercise what its strengths are. Not to the fullest extent, anyway. Air power, right, and precision strikes, cruise missiles and the like from a distance, right? That's what the U.S. military is really good at. That's what they've done for decades now, and they can't use that at all effectively in Ukraine because they can't filter that through the Kiev regime in any kind of useful way. They haven't been able to thus far, and they don't want to get too directly involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the risk of a greater regional conflagration. And with Taiwan, yes, that conflict is naval air conflict with China is coming, but it's not here yet. So instead, with the U.S. military procurement is straining, and Biden administration has said that they can meet the demands of Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan too. Someone yells in the background, right? All at the same time, and it's false, right? On many crucial items, it's absolutely false because the U.S. can't even supply Ukraine with the Kiev regime in Ukraine with what it needs for its conflict, right? The New York Times ran a piece about a month ago looking at Russian military production compared to NATO, not just the U.S., but all of NATO military production. And they said that Russia is outproducing not just the U.S., but all of NATO in artillery shells by 7 times, which is it's insane, right? And there's tanks and there's missiles and everything that's going along with it. So now Zelensky piping up starting to have domestic political problems, the regime, infighting in the regime at home. He has tried to present himself multiple times into the Israeli conflict. Tried to go to Israel. Tried to maintain relevance and some attention from his primary patrons in the U.S. And he's tried to link, the axis of evil is behind the Hamas's actions, right? Russia, North Korea, and Iran. They arranged all of this and everything, which is just a madman raving. Both the U.S. and Israeli government have said that there is no indication that Iran had any direct involvement in or even knowledge of Hamas's plans. As to accusations about Russia has nothing to do with Hamas. Russia hasn't had anything. I mean, they talked to them, but they haven't supported Hamas since, for the entirety of their real existence, because they don't do Sunni Islamists, right? Russia doesn't support that. And actually, the Israeli ambassador to Ukraine chimed in on that and talked about such accusations that Russia was behind Hamas as absurd. Absurd, right? That's the Israeli ambassador, right? So, now that said, Russia and China are really benefiting from this situation geopolitically because the rest of the world already not in line with the U.S. anymore on we're talking the global South or everyone but the West, if you want to call them the rest with capital R.
Right.
They were already not behind the U.S. Existential economic war of sanctions on Russia. They've really not been behind the thing on China as well. And now they see this hypocrisy as Israel just goes full bore genocidal, ethnic cleansing, overreaction, carpet bombing a tightly packed prison city of 2 million civilians. And they're like, whoa. I mean, talk about, tell us some more about global order and rules-based order.
This is the thing about it. The accusations that they detailed against Russia for the last couple of years, at least, of this war in Ukraine, we're now seeing them illustrated in depth and in full detail with the actions of Israel. And that, of course, is not good for the U.S. foreign policy. All right, Mark, thank you so much. It's been very useful and very enlightening speaking with you as always. And we'll speak with you again next week.
Thank you.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.